and welcome. Oh, hi everyone, and welcome to A Mighty Blazes YA panel. My name is Birdie Siegel, and I will be your host and moderator for today. Today, in celebration of National Hispanic Heritage Month, we have some amazing and talented Latinx voices from the YA genre. So please join me in welcoming our amazing panelists for today, Ms. Jennifer De Leon and Nikki Barthelmess. Thank you guys so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Why don't we just start by giving a short introduction? If you want to introduce yourselves, your books, give us a short elevator pitch of what your books are about. Jen, if you'd like to start.
Great, sure. I am the author of my debut YA novel is Don't Ask Me Where I'm From. And it tells the story of 15-year-old Liliana Cruz. She is struggling to fit in at her new school. She's part of a METCO program, which is a desegregation program. So students of color in Boston are bused to neighboring wealthy white towns. And she is really struggling to fit in. All the while her father is missing, or she thinks he's missing, but really he has been deported to Guatemala. And she, up until this moment, had no idea that her parents were undocumented. So it sets her off on this path to figure out more about where she's from. But don't ask her that question, where she's from. And I also have an essay collection called White Space, essays that intersect and deal with whiteness and also the white space of the page and learning to claim that space.
That's amazing. Okay, Nikki, what about you?
My name is Nikki Barthelmess, and I am the author of Everything Within and In Between, which is coming out Tuesday, October 5th. And it's about Ree Fernandez, who she's mixed and Latinx, but she has light skin, like I do. And she's trying to connect with her heritage by learning Spanish and reconnecting with her absent mom, who has been gone since she was little. And all the while, she's trying to keep this from her strict Mexican immigrant grandmother, who has kept her from both and very much wants to assimilate and wants Ree to have a life that she imagines is better. And that doesn't include their heritage. And that very much includes pushing her toward whiteness and toward her best friend's kind of world of mansions and country clubs and away from their neighborhood, which is largely Latinx like them and all that. So, and then I also wrote The Quiet You Carry and the sequel, Quiet No More. And those books are behind me somewhere. Go get them. But very, very excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Please, everyone, check out their books because they're amazing authors. I've read both of your works and amazing. That's all I can say. So please check them out now. We're going to go straight into our questions because we have a lot to cover. So my first question for both of you is how your experience as a member of the Latinx community really inspired you to write these stories on culture and identity. So how did that inspire you? How similar are your stories to your personal experiences?
Yeah. You want to kick it off, Nikki? I mean,
I was going to say, ask you if you wanted to. Okay.
I can totally go. Whatever you want.
You go first. I will be inspired by your answer.
Oh my God. Okay. Yeah, no, this is great. I could talk about this forever. I mean, this is the book that I needed as a young person. It's the book I wish I had had. And Toni Morrison has that great quote: if there's a book in the world that you want to read, but it hasn't been written yet, then you need to be the one to write it. And for me, that is this book, a book with a Latina on the cover, someone who I can identify with, and someone that I just really feel like represents so many young girls. I was a teacher in Boston Public Schools for almost 10 years, and I really longed to have a book like this that I could pass to my students. I wasn't someone who grew up reading books where I saw my experiences reflected much. I actually didn't read my first Latina author until I was a freshman in college when I read The House on Mango Street by Sandra Cisneros. I mean, that is not okay. A freshman in college to go that long and not see yourself reflected in literature is just, that's what inspires me to write books like with strong Latinx characters and really kind of defying that danger of the single story that Chimamanda Adichie talks about in her TED Talk, like providing stories that offer different perspectives on the Latina experience that maybe people don't often see in the media or portrayed in the news. And Liliana and I have a lot in common. We both love writing. We both have parents who really value education. But I was also born in Boston like her, but I don't have the experience of having parents who were undocumented. Both of my parents became US citizens before my sisters and I were born, but I have several family members, and I had so many students who were constantly like fearful that they would come home from school and one of their parents would be gone. And it's really important for a number of reasons, I think, to have these stories, aside from having people see themselves reflected in the book. But I've been doing lots of school visits, and I had a question recently where I think it was a middle school student, and he said, "What does deported mean?" And I love that he asked that question, because it was an opportunity to teach and to show him, right? Oh, this is what this is. And I just think that stories are a great way to offer those windows and mirrors. So I could go on, but I love writing Latinx characters. I will be doing it forever.
Amazing answer. Nikki, are you ready to follow that one?
Oh my gosh, how does one follow? Jen, I don't know. Okay, so similarly to Jen, I didn't grow up seeing myself and my heritage reflected in the books that I read. And I don't think I read a book that I felt really seen by until I was a young adult. And I read Mexican White Boy by Matt de la Pena, which I was just tweeting about last night. And then he followed me back. I was like, because for Las Musas, Jen and I are both Las Musas members. So we were doing the Twitter chat, and it was like, who was kind of the ancestral story to your story or whatever. And I had to think about it for a second. I'm like, that's the one. Because I hadn't really seen anything before that. And I had a really hard time growing up because I didn't really see a place where I fit in, because I, have my mom's side of the family is Mexican and Mexican American, and my dad's is Jewish. And if you don't see me with some of my Mexican family members, you wouldn't necessarily know that that's my culture. But that was I mainly grew up with my mom's side of the family. That's who I was closest with. My biggest, the person I've been closest with my entire life is my grandmother, who's a Mexican immigrant. And so I didn't see a place for me where someone who was in this in between, but felt not kind of seen by the outside world, but also seeing all the other things that people who had darker skin than I do, or have more identifying features that identify their ethnicity, and seeing how, people are treated within my family or outside of my family, and having conflict with that, and then experiencing all the things that come with whiteness, but not really feeling like I fit in there when I'm hearing like microaggressive comments and stuff like that. And then also dealing with immigrant family members who are like, so we gotta, they wouldn't use the word assimilate, but that's what they want to do. We're Americans, we got to fit in. They worked so hard to get here. And all of these feelings and not knowing where I belong really led me to want a book that reflected that. And so I, like Jen said, I wrote it.
It's amazing.
It's so good. It's so good. Everybody should read it and buy it Tuesday and forever.
You're doing my job for me. I love it. I was going to say, so do you have any sort of like personal anecdotes from your own family, and, music wise, or food that you make with your family that you kind of snuck into your stories in different places?
That's a great question. I mean, I have some of my personal food tastes that I snuck in. Like, I have Liliana's mother. She's obsessed with cooking Vietnamese food, just because I love Vietnamese food, and I studied abroad in Vietnam for a semester in college. So I was like, I'm just going to put that in there. But definitely pepián is a popular Guatemalan dish. It's like a stew, like a caldo. And it's in the book. One of Liliana's uncles like teaches her how to make it, and it's a scene in the kitchen, and I liked bringing that in. And in my essays, I write more, I guess, about food, and it's nice to have readers like on Twitter or whatever. They're like, I've never seen the word mixtas in a book, and it's just a very specific Guatemalan like fried tortilla with like avocado and cabbage, and then a hot dog sliced in half, and mustard and Parmesan cheese. It's like everything but the kitchen sink is on there, but it's so good. So it's these little things make a big difference, you know.
Definitely. Nikki, do you have anything that you added into your book that we should look for?
Well, I don't know that it's like nothing to like write home about, but like I love my grandma's enchiladas, and that's what I always had growing up. But more than the food and the other things in there, you know, just really basic carnitas, whatever, was more of like the culture around cooking with some Mexican women. So when the grandma in the story won't let short for Maria, into the kitchen and help her, she always kind of swats her away. It's like, no, I got it. And then she'll fill, which isn't always the case, because a lot of the time all the women come together and cook together. So I guess it depends. But then also it's like she puts everything on her plate, like a huge plate, and is like, okay, you should know she has to eat this all. And that was, I feel like, more implicit than actually stated. But I was looking at, I'm thinking about a Bookstagram post that I saw today of someone who had read my book and said that she had laughed out loud when she read in my bio that I'm always trying to convince my abuelita that feminism means it's okay that I don't cook that my husband does all the cooking. And she was like, oh my gosh, I feel that, because I'm a grown woman, but whenever I'm around my mom with my husband, she makes me like serve him and wait on him. And I was just like laughing, because my whole family is scandalized by the fact that I don't cook and I will not wait on my husband. He's the Latinx woman in this house. He's cooking for me, taking care of me. So it's really,
I wish everyone had that personality. That's awesome.
So that's kind of what I'm thinking right now. But you know, yeah.
The next question I had for you, which we've already kind of talked about, is why did you specifically write your books for younger audiences? Why do you think it's so important for a younger audience to read these books and to take something out of them, as opposed to an adult audience?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, I bet how Nikki might feel, which is that it feels urgent. Like, young people need these books now, and they shouldn't have to wait until they're 25 or older. And the population is changing and growing, and there are more Latinx kids in schools, and you know, just in the United States, and we need to have more representation at the publishing level. And so Nikki mentioned it earlier, but we're both part of an organization called Las Musas. And for those of you who might not be familiar with it, it is an organization that was founded, right, by Ida Salazar, like a few years ago. I think she was
pretty new. Yeah,
it's pretty new, and it's a community of Latinx female authors who write picture books, early reader books, middle grade, and YA, so children's literature. And it's a support network, and Nikki's way more involved than I am. I'm like, but so you should talk about it more, because it's such a great, and we actually have a Latinx Kid Lit Festival every December, and we'll have one coming up soon, and it's free. It's entirely online, and there are so many amazing sessions on like every topic you can imagine. And you know, schools can attend it together, classrooms, there are teacher guides. It's just a wealth of resources. But I feel like Nikki knows more about Las Musas than I do.
That sounds.
You want me to jump in, or I don't want to cut you off. And then I'll answer too. Well, we're a great organization, just like Jen said. She explained so much of what we are, and we have the conference, which is really exciting, but it's just a way to, you know, I think there's like 5 or 6 I think it's 6% or less of the children's books that are published are by Latinx authors, right? And, you know, our population is much greater than that. And so I feel like it's not just for us creators who have stuff to say, but it's for the readers who need to hear this and need to be seen. But it's also for the people who are of different cultures too. So maybe if a and this is going to kind of answer the question too, but like, if there are more kids who have a different culture than ours and are reading books like ours, then maybe when people grow up, they'll be less likely to say the kind of comments that I've gotten, like asking me if I'm the first person in my Latinx family to go to college. Just, read a book, educate yourself. And kids, they learn from when they're small. And so the culture is reflected around them. And this is in one of your later questions, I think, Birdie, but like it's in the people they meet, what they see at school. So, seeing a virtual conference or having like a Latinx author speak to them or read a book or have a friend, but also just it's completely reflected in everything part of their world. And then they grow up and then they have the way that they see us and the way that they see themselves. And it's like a time where we have an influence. And I'm not trying to, I know us authors aren't like, we're not trying to like hit people over the head with a message. We just want to tell a good story. But like, it's much more than just seeing ourselves in books and having people like us see themselves in books, which is so important because you don't know what's possible for you if you don't see it. But it's also showing other people so they can, have a better understanding and not be, for lack of a better word, ignorant. And I can say to a little bit more to the question is I grew up not only not seeing myself reflected in the books that I read about my mixed heritage not seeing that reflected. But I also grew up in, I went to foster care when I was 12. And so in the media, I saw just like Latinx people see a bunch of horrible negative stereotypes about ourselves. I saw every bad guy on Law and Order was the foster kid. All the perps were the foster kids. And I was just like, well, man, all I heard were all the statistics of what wasn't possible for me and how I was going to end up in jail and on drugs and all this stuff. And it's like, okay, well, shoot, that's not really what I want. But, you don't really know if you don't have teachers or family or whomever showing you this stuff, then you have to see what's reflected in the culture around you in TV and books and things like that. And that's why it's so important, because we have a chance to make a difference in these kids' lives who need to see this so much at a time when they need it, arguably more than ever.
Yeah. It's definitely true. And I'll just say that I am white. I am from a rural town in upstate New York. So growing up in an all-white school, with neighbors of the upper middle class, like I got all of my exposure and stuff from YA books and from reading. And so it was so important to have authors like you guys that are willing to show us these works. So, you have this cultural, there's more out there. You don't have to be completely ignorant. So thank you to you guys for writing these books for us. I think it's really important, not just for these Hispanic audience, but for everyone instead.
Yeah.
So we're going to move on to our next question. We talk about a lot in your books, a lot of political and social issues. One of my questions was how much research that you had to put in before writing about these issues, or how much of it was personal that you knew, and what makes it so important that you included it in your work?
Yeah, it's funny because I think sometimes readers might think because we're writing novels and fiction that you just make it up entirely. But there is a lot of research that goes into, sometimes, right? Every book is different, into writing novels. And for me, even though I could draw from personal experience and those of my students and family members to build Liliana's character, she is taking part in a real program called METCO. And this program has been around for over 50 years. And I wanted to get it right as much as possible. And so I had to do research, and I read books about the program. I interviewed students. I shadowed students at different high schools. I, did interviews, did all these things, and then had MECO students read my drafts. And they pointed out great, things where they were like, no, that would never happen, or like, Miss, they're so honest, they were like, Miss, no one drinks milk. Okay. I'm like, okay. So they're like, yeah, we drink iced tea, like brisk iced tea. It was so specific. And so I really loved getting those details. And it's so rewarding to be able to I guess share it with MECO students, because the program is in 33 different towns around Boston. So that's a lot of students who are doing this daily trip of waking up at like 4 or 5 in the morning, taking a bus, sometimes for an hour, to go to another school in another neighborhood, and then take the bus all the way back. And if they do after school sports, if the district provides a late bus, then it's like they're getting home when it's dark out, and then they do the whole thing over again the next day. And there are lots of things to say about the program itself, but I wanted to get those details right. And so that was some research that I did for this book.
Some great research too. It sounds like that's amazing. What about you, Nikki? Did you have to do any research? I know you said you're part of the foster system, though. Did you have to look into anything about finding parents and stuff like that?
No, I didn't have to. I mean, I feel like most of it is just what would you do if you were looking for someone?
Yeah.
I think that so like my main character, I understand a lot of Spanish from growing up around it, but wasn't taught it directly. So I am very insecure about some of and I actually do okay, but I get nervous, and I don't have like the best grasp of that. That's like a really nice way of putting it. So I wanted to make sure I researched the Spanish, and I had a ton of readers, correct me, and was very good to have other people say like, okay, well, that's not actually how you would say this. You would say it this way. But I also wanted to make sure I got, because there's a Spanish classroom, and there's a different way you learn Spanish in school. So like the Spanish that I understand is more like how my family speaks. So like I wanted to make sure. So I have a friend who's teaches college Spanish, and I'm like, ooh, okay. So can you help me with some of the classroom parts? What kind of stuff would they be learning, and what kind of stuff would they be talking about? And then I think just this book was a way a means of self-discovery for myself. But I also looked at some of the ways, not just me or my family or other people, because it is fiction. It doesn't, even though a lot comes from real life, it's still fictional. I still made up a lot. It's not my life story by any means, but looking at the greater context in our community and our culture with colorism, with a lot of these really important issues that I wanted to talk about with great sensitivity and care, because they're so important, that I definitely looked into and tried to think outside of myself to get to where I hope, is reflected in a sensitive, appropriate way in the story.
One of my questions, actually, which you were just touching on, is when you include some Spanish in your work, how do you decide what words to use, and how do you make sure you're using the correct words? Kind of, how do they fit into the book naturally, almost?
Yeah, that's interesting. I'd be curious to hear how you did this, Nikki, because it's kind of like I don't think about it too much, like when I'm writing, there's certain words that I'm like, that has to be in Spanish. Like I can't, for instance, like the word mija, right? It refers to like my daughter. That's the like literal translation, like mi hija, but it's smushed together. So it's like mija. And I grew up hearing my mother say that to me all the time. My grandmother, it's like a comforting kind of term. And if I had translated that every time the mother calls her daughter mija, it would be like, pass me the ketchup, my daughter.
Yeah, a little weird.
Like, it's so clunky. It would sound so inauthentic. So yes, I wrote the book in English, and the characters sometimes are speaking to each other in English, sometimes in Spanish. I had to make choices, on the level of craft of like when I'm including some words in Spanish, and definitely not italicizing them. For years, I studied with the author Junot Diaz, and I would italicize everything, like salsa, taco, and he was like, stop doing that. And he's like, just don't italicize it. Like the word isn't foreign to the characters. So don't italicize them. Like, who are you italicizing for? And he's like, we don't italicize words like ballet. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's true. I guess that's a French word. But anyway, so There are a lot of politics actually around, like, do I italicize or not?
That's so interesting too.
Yeah.
As
Yeah.
you're saying it, I'm thinking, yeah, you see all of these words in italics, like, yeah, all the time. That's so funny.
Yeah.
Interesting. I was going, oh goodness, did I lose my train of thought?
Yeah, I don't know how Nikki does it, like, with the Spanish.
Well, with the italics, it was the same thing. It was almost, so I didn't want to use them at all, and neither did my publisher, my editor. But even sometimes I would italicize if I was trying to do for emphasis, and then we would even take it out because we didn't want it to be confusing. Like, no, we're not italicizing. So I would find a different word to emphasize what I was trying to say. But and I totally agree 100% with what Jen said, because it's just we're not doing that for the words that you mentioned. It's not different. It's we're not othering it or the characters. So I completely agree with that. And then as far as the language goes, I'm really lucky that my editor, I don't know if she's watching right now, Carolina Ortiz. So she speaks Spanish, and she was so helpful and kind of adding some stuff in or correcting me when, like, I kind of got off a little bit off stray, or, you know, with like, I don't know if somebody would really say it like that, or I don't know, maybe this feels kind of weird or whatever. But I don't know that I was making choices of, like, specifically what words. It was more of like, I want them to say this. Okay, how do you say that? All right, let me throw it in and let's see if it works. So not that I guess not as thoughtful as I could have been about it.
One of our questions, this one's also, well, it's for both of you, I would say. But when it comes to different generations and representation of Latinx culture, how do you think these issues kind of differ between these generations? Things that you had to worry about, older generations had to worry about, that's no longer so much of an issue, or things that younger people now have to worry about. And how did you include that in your book?
Yeah,
so that's a big thing in my book. It's a really big thing in my book. And I just thought about, again, even though this isn't like, it's not based on my life story, but it's really easy to at least write from an authentic place of yourself when you think about what you've experienced. And I just think about how different it was when my grandparents came here in their 20s to Southern California, the area that I live in, from Mexico. And the world that they inhabited is so much different than the world that I'm inhabiting, not just because of what they look like, not just because of their language being different, but just everything was different for them. Right. And so what they wanted out of life, not just culturally from where they came from, but also like what was possible for just anybody back then. Just all the things are so different. You can look at a different culture and see how different things are for women if you look at their parents versus their grandparents, and you could look at how different. And then when you get in different cultures, then when you get in immigration and stuff, then it just gets even more complicated. But just looking at, somebody who is working so hard to be accepted and to be just treated well, and not even they could have come from a very educated background. Not that it matters, not that you even need to be, but then they come someplace and then they're treated as if they're not smart because of what they look like, because of what they sound like, because I don't know how many other people can speak multiple languages, but try to say something wrong and then people act like you're dumb. And so that kind of world versus one where, in my generation and younger generations, we're like trying to be who we are and to find ourselves and to be all of us ourselves, to be accepted and care about social justice and care about, and not that like our family members didn't care about that, but they were just trying to survive. They don't have time to try to fix the world. They're just trying to like survive. So like, then we want to fix things for ourselves and for other people. And so our worldview is going to be so different. And there's not one, there's certain times when there is one that's right and that's one that's wrong, but it's also like very humbling to look and be like, yeah, it's easy for me to say X, Y, and Z, but I didn't go through that. Mm-hmm. I don't have the experiences that my grandma did of like packing the strawberries from the fields and having her son, my uncle, run it back and forth to go quickly. And, that's why she wouldn't eat strawberries for years. And I didn't understand it. And that's why I think she probably thinks it's wild that people will pay money to like go pick berries and pick fruit, like you see on freaking Instagram. It's like, why are you paying to do that? You should be getting paid for that. That's ridiculous. And taking pictures of it. But anyway, so it's just our lives are so different.
Definitely.
Wow. That's so good. Wow, I'm gonna be thinking about that for a long time. The strawberries, you're right. It's like you have to pay to go pick blueberries or
Like whenever I see my friends doing that, I'm like, nope, no, not for me.
That's such a good point. I feel like you have an essay in there. I'm just like like the symbolism. Anyway, but yeah, it's really powerful. The stories and the experiences we inherit, through generations. And yeah, you're right. I'm thinking about like Richard Rodriguez, and he wrote this great book called The Hunger of Memory. And he writes a lot about how his generation, older generation now, like they tried so hard to assimilate and have this kind of erasure of culture, language, identity. They tried to be white passing. They tried to just like fit in to the mainstream, and they purposely didn't teach their children Spanish. It was very popular to do this in this generation so that I was going to say the students, but so that their children, the kids, wouldn't be put in ESL classes in school, and so they wouldn't maybe have an accent in English. And it was just like reading about that, the intent of wanting to erase, to strip the culture from the next generation. But I feel like, I don't know, Nikki, if you agree, but it's like I feel like we're in this new, I don't want to say wave because I hope it's here to stay, but this generation maybe is a little bit more like wanting to embrace heritage and multiple identities. There are more biracial, multiracial kids being born every day, my kids included, and it's like, I just really want them to embrace like both sides of their cultures, and not be ashamed, oh my goodness, of any aspect of it. So yeah, write that essay. I'll read it. So good.
I'll send it your way.
But that actually brings me, one of my other questions for you is for people out there that are multiracial or have multiple heritage or cultures that they identify with, how do you want them to embrace it? How do your characters work with that balance of living in America and having this cultural identity? How do they deal with that in the books?
I mean, yeah, I'm like thinking about, go for it.
So, sorry, let me just make sure I understood your question. How do they deal with having those two kind of identities?
Yeah, how do they learn how to embrace it and balance those identities?
So I think that she has a lot to learn about, the way that things have been. She has her own kind of misconceptions too. It's not just her grandma, and she's making choices on her own, whether they're influenced by her grandma or not. She's still able to choose who she hangs out with and what she does. And this story is kind of about her making changes so that she can kind of reflect better about who she really is or who she wants to be. And I think kind of like what Jen was saying. So, in the past, and that's what I was trying to get to with my grandparents or whatever, it's all usually it's from a place of wanting things to be better for the next generations and not to go through the hardships that they've gone through. And so at least in my story and in my family, I think a lot of the time people are like, what are you yapping about? Like, seriously, your life is so much easier. Just get with the program. Why are you making problems for yourself? But like, it isn't that. And that kind of attitude is what kind of keeps this stuff from being talked about and keeps people sometimes either being ashamed or not feeling like we all can relate to this regardless of what culture. Like, where do I belong? Where do I fit in? And then trying to piece all the pieces of ourselves into like a bigger thing. I feel like Jen will be a lot more articulate than I am about this, but just, I grew up very much like didn't really think I could be both. I had to be one or the other. And usually that felt into the because of what I look like, the white side, but that there was so much in me that came from my family and came from how I was raised and how I think, how I act. That's all there. And even if people couldn't see it, and even if I felt like it was shoved down, and, to make matters worse, my father, who I'm estranged from, is, for lack of a better word, racist too. So like that was also very confusing. So kids need to or all of us, you know, we're multifaceted people. There's a lot to us, and that could be culture, that could be so many other things. And it's important to reflect that in stories so that people can do that and feel empowered to take that. And so Jen's kids can feel empowered. So people like me can feel empowered. And so other people don't put others in a box, whether well-meaning or not, because that can be harmful.
Yeah, completely.
Did I answer your question? I feel like I went on a tangent.
I love
it. I'm just in awe of your answers.
But I would love to hear what Jen has to say.
I mean, I'm just thinking about my own upbringing. Like I grew up in a very white town and was constantly like having to convince my parents to let me do what my friends were doing. Like, you know, sleep over a friend's house, or I was like, there's this camp. They're like, nope. I'm like, but everybody else can go to the dance with a boy. You know, they're like, nope. Like just like all these things that I'm like, why are you guys so strict? And they explain like, you know, we're not from here. Like that, the American girls can do that, but you're not going to do that. And that was always the line that my mom would use. She's like, para las Americanas, you know, she's like, but not us. Like, but I would start to think, but I am American. You know, it's like, so where do I fit in? And I think both of our books are coming of age stories where these young, strong Latina protagonists are trying to figure out like their place in the world. And on top of like the regular teenage stuff, you have like the cultural elements and all of that. So there's a lot to dissect. You know, so my son, my older son, he's 8. He brought lunch to school one day, like a couple years ago, and he brought what we call orange arroz. So it's like rice with like a bunch of sazon packets in it. So it makes the rice like bright orange. And one of the other kids was like, that rice looks funny. Like, what are you eating? You know? And so he was so upset and like came home. And my husband is like so calm. So he was like, okay, tell me what happened. And I'm like, who is this? I'm going in tomorrow.
Where do they live?
What names? You know? And so he's like, take it down a notch. And so what I did a few weeks later, not like super immediate, but definitely like, you know, a few weeks later, my mom, my dad, me, and at the time, my younger son. So I had like the baby in the carrier. We like all rolled into the class and did a presentation on Guatemala. And like I had like slides. My parents were like unrolling textiles. The baby was like bouncing. We passed around at Quetzal, like the money, and they colored like the Quetzal bird. And I read a book, you know, and the teacher was all for it. And she was so amazing. And the students were great. And I wanted my son to feel like, yeah, like I'm proud of this. Like my grandparents are from Guatemala. My mom was born here. She's Guatemalan American, and he has some of that history in him too, you know? So anyway, I like telling that story because it's just, I'm sure it happens like to kids all the time and in many different ways. And I don't want any kid, especially a young Latino kid, to like feel ashamed. I don't want anybody to feel ashamed about where they're from or where their family backgrounds are from. Everyone is from somewhere, you know?
Yeah. And actually that was going to go into my last question, which is, what would you like non-minority readers to really take out of your novels, and how do we support Latinx representation in literature going forward? Nikki, do you want to start us off?
Sure. I think that it's never too late to learn. So we all learn. I've learned things. Other people can learn things. Nobody is perfect. And all of us, we're in a culture that has a lot of racist points of view, has a lot of sexist point of views, has a lot of anti-LGBTQ point of views, fat phobic. Just there's so much internalized that you might not even know it just by being alive and existing in this world, in this American culture, which is great in so many ways. I'm not trying to put it down, and that it's okay. It doesn't, just because you have something to learn doesn't mean that it's us versus you versus them, that anybody is calling you irredeemable, that there's always a way to improve. You can always do better, and that it's our job to make ourselves be better, not other people's jobs to kind of tell us how we've, to kind of gently tell us how we've hurt them, And so I just think that's one thing that I would want, and that everybody has a story, and that we all have a lot in common, and we're all trying to figure out who we are and to belong. We all want the same things in different ways. And then just to be like a unifying message that we can do this, you can do this, and it's okay if you've made a mistake, just try to do better. So that would be what I would want to say. And then how can we support Latinx books? Is that what it was?
Yeah.
So visit lasmusas.com. Do exactly what you're doing right now. Put on panels, invite. Don't ever, if you're ever putting on a panel, and it doesn't have to be for Hispanics or Latinx Heritage Month, but if you look and see that like everybody on your panel looks the same, is the same gender, is the same culture, like do something different about that. And don't do that, because our world is so diverse, our country is so diverse, and we want to reflect that, so everybody has a seat at the table. And read these books, watch these movies, have friends who look different than you do, because not just because it's like the right thing to do, but it's because it's like you'll have like a much more varied, interesting life. Like, don't be basic.
I like that. Yes. Perfect.
I love that. Hashtag don't be basic. Yeah, you're right. I mean, I agree with everything you said. I think that this panel is a great example of like an action, because I think a lot of people have these like ideas or feelings, but they I don't want to say rarely, but taking action is like a different step. And I love A Mighty Blaze. I love that you're having this panel. And yes, visit lasmusas.com and go to the Latinx Kid Lit Festival in December. I do see this Latinx Heritage Month like more, maybe virtual events are easier to do now, but I see more events that, for instance, companies are now having like a book club, and they'll bring in a Latinx author, or they'll have, just speakers. Schools are really great about bringing in authors. And I just think it's important to be intentional about making Latinx identity like a presence in the schools and companies and different environments. And I also think that it's not, I think a lot of times people put Latinos in a bucket, like it's like a monolith, but there's so many different cultures and identities with underneath that umbrella. And it's, a Guatemalan person has different experiences than a Cuban person, than a Chilean person, and I know it sounds obvious, but I think one area I'd love to see change is to not just lump everybody together and assume that they're all kind of, I don't know, part of that same group. Like we are, like I love identifying with like Latinas, for instance, but then within that, it's just, there are different experiences. And thinking about representation, I mean, the National Book Awards, when the long list came out, it was really disheartening to see the absence of Latino authors on those lists. And so things like that, if you're putting together a festival or you're on a committee judging contest or whatever, just to really think about representation in that way. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I guess to sum it up, everyone, please read these books if they are amazing. So for our panelists, please follow them on Instagram because they're amazing. Thank you guys so much for being here today. I know this was a very heavy topic, but I'm so glad we have you here to, give voices to this topic. So thank you, everyone, and hopefully we will see you next time.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yes.